The sound of fabric tearing sliced through the chatter of the crowded diner, followed by a chorus of cruel laughter. Jenna froze, the cool air hitting her exposed thighs like a slap. Her tray clattered to the floor, plates shattering coffee splashing across her shoes. 3 men stood behind her, grinning wide, like they'd just pulled off the funniest joke in the world. A hush fell over the tables as dozens of eyes turned toward the scene. The bullies hooted and pointed, making crude remarks while Jenna's cheeks burned. Jenna Morales, 26, had worked at Darby's Diner for almost 4 years. The Friday night crowd was usually just noisy and impatient, but tonight the energy had shifted the moment the trio walked in. She recognized them instantly, local troublemakers in their late 20s, the kind who prowled bars looking for easy targets. One of them, Shane, had smirked at her earlier, making an off-color comment about her uniform being too tight for someone with legs like that. She'd brushed it off, focusing on refilling coffee mugs and delivering plates, but she knew that look in their eyes. As she scrambled to pull the torn edges of her skirt together, she forced herself to keep breathing. The whispers around her stung almost as much as the laughter. A teenage girl at a nearby booth gave her a sympathetic glance. Her date looked down awkwardly. Jenna's manager stood frozen behind the counter, caught between wanting to intervene and not wanting a scene. The bullies knew no one would step in. That was their power. They thrived in public spaces where humiliation was a weapon. She gathered the scattered dishes with trembling hands, her eyes fixed on the floor. Inside, though, a different heat was building, one far older than this diner and these men. Memories flooded back, the sting of leather gloves on her forearms, the smack of pads against her shin, the deep centering breaths before a fight. Years ago, she'd been a rising name in regional MMA circuits. She'd trained until her muscles ached, fought until her knuckles bled, and learned discipline from a coach who treated her like a soldier. But an injury and a family emergency had pulled her from the sport, and she'd walked away quietly. These men didn't know that. They only saw a waitress in a short skirt, balancing trays and forced smiles. Shane leaned closer, his beer-stained breath curling against her ear. "Didn't think you could make this uniform any hotter, sweetheart," he sneered, his friends cackling behind him. Jenna straightened her eyes, locking on his reflection in the glass door of the pie case. In that moment, she wasn't in a diner anymore. She was back in the gym gloves on heart steady. She said nothing. Not yet. The time would come, and when it did, she would make sure it was on her terms, not theirs. The rest of her shift dragged on in a blur of whispers, sideways glances, and the sound of the bullies retelling their little stunt to anyone who would listen. Jenna moved like a machine, her body working while her mind planned. She wasn't just angry, she was patient. That patience had won her fights in the cage, and it would serve her again tonight. By the time the clock struck midnight, the bullies had stumbled out into the parking lot, laughing too loud. Jenna untied her apron, smoothed her torn skirt as best she could, and stepped outside into the cool night air. She wasn't heading home, not yet. She had unfinished business. Jenna's sneakers crunched over the gravel behind the diner as she headed toward her beat-up Corolla. The night air was sharp, tinged with the faint smell of fried grease drifting from the kitchen vents. She could hear their voices from across the lot, loud, unfiltered, and dripping with the same arrogance they'd flaunted inside. Shane leaned against the hood of a rusted pickup, cigarette in hand, while the other two, Troy and Mick, passed a brown paper bag between them like it was a trophy. From the corner of her eye, Jenna caught her reflection in the car window. Her skirt was jagged where the fabric had been torn, but her face had changed. There was no forced smile now. Her jaw was set, her gaze steady. She slid into the driver's seat, but instead of starting the car, she just sat there, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. The humiliation from earlier replayed in flashes, plates crashing coffee, splattering Shane's breath on her ear. Each image sharpened into something harder, colder. She had spent years learning how to control herself in a fight, but right now, that discipline felt like a fire building under her skin. When she looked up again, Shane was pointing at her car, laughing and making an obscene gesture. The other two followed his lead, jeering like middle school bullies who'd never grown up. Jenna turned the key just enough to hear the engine click, but then she killed it. No, not yet. She thought back to Coach Ramirez, a grizzled ex-Marine who had drilled into her the value of patience. Don't rush the takedown, Morales. Let them think they're winning until you take their ground. That was the thing about MMA. Most fights weren't won with the first punch. They were won in the setup, and she was setting this one up. The truth was, Jenna hadn't just been some weekend fighter. At her peak, she'd been undefeated in the regional women's lightweight division. Her kicks had been her signature snapping roundhouses and brutal leg sweeps that left opponents gasping on the mat. But after her mother's stroke, she'd traded training camps for double shifts at the diner. The only fights she'd been in since were against overdue bills. She slipped out of the car, heading toward the front of the diner where the parking lot met the street. The three men noticed instantly, their voices dropping just enough to carry a new kind of challenge. "Hey, Skirt," Mick called, slurring the words. "We weren't done talking to you." Jenna didn't flinch. She walked past them without a glance, her hands in her jacket pockets, her pace steady. She wanted them to follow, needed them to. And just like she'd predicted, the sound of boots on pavement followed her around the corner. Her pulse quickened, but not with fear. This was muscle memory waking up. The spacing, the angles, the mental map of where each body was. Her mind ran through it all without conscious thought. She could hear Shane closing in behind her, his voice low and taunting now. "You think you're too good to answer us," he said, his tone sharp. Jenna stopped walking. The street lamp above cast her shadow long across the sidewalk. Slowly, she turned to face them. "No," she said evenly. "I just don't waste words on people who won't remember them tomorrow." That made Shane smirk, and in that split second, Jenna knew she had him exactly where she wanted him. The real fight was about to start. The three men fanned out instinctively, their drunken grins dripping with the kind of overconfidence that came from never having faced real consequences. Shane took the lead, swaggering forward, with his chin up, while Troy circled slightly to Jenna's left, and Mick hung back laughing like he was watching a comedy sketch. Jenna's stance shifted almost imperceptibly. Feet shoulder-width apart, weight on the balls of her feet, knees loose. Years of drills in dim gyms had taught her how to make that shift without telegraphing it, how to let opponents think she was still relaxed. She wanted them close. Shane stepped in his hand, darting toward her arm like he was going to grab her. That was his mistake. In one swift motion, Jenna pivoted on her left foot, her right leg snapping up in a tight, controlled arc. Her shin collided with his outer thigh in a solid thwack that made him grunt and stumble sideways. The look on his face flickered from smug to shocked in under a second. What the Troy started, but Jenna was already moving. She stepped in with a quick front kick to his midsection, the heel of her sneaker sinking into his gut. The air whooshed out of him, his body folding forward as he staggered back 2 steps. Mick's laughter cut off mid-breath. His eyes widened as he realized this wasn't the same waitress they'd mocked an hour ago. He hesitated, glancing between his friends and her, and that hesitation was all Jenna needed. She closed the distance, her left hand snapping up to parry his clumsy reach, then her right knee driving upward with brutal precision. It connected with the bottom of his ribs, sending him sprawling against the diner's brick wall. The air around them shifted. This wasn't a joke anymore, and they felt it. Shane tried to recover his pride, refusing to let him back down. He lunged, swinging wildly, but Jenna's training took over. She slipped the punch, feeling the air brush past her cheek, and countered with a short, devastating hook kick to his temple. It wasn't full force. She didn't want to put him in a hospital, but it was enough to drop him to one knee, his eyes glassy. "You," Troy wheezed, still trying to catch his breath. "You crazy." "Wrong word," Jenna cut in her voice, steady, almost calm. "The one you're looking for is fighter." That calm scared them more than her strikes. Drunk or not, they could see it in her eyes. This wasn't someone throwing random punches out of anger. This was someone who knew exactly where to hit, how to move, and when to stop. Troy looked like he wanted to back away, but Shane, still clinging to what little dignity he had left, barked, "Don't let her walk away from this." He pushed himself up, blood beading, at the corner of his lip. Jenna didn't move back. She planted her feet, shoulders squared, and in that moment, the fight stopped being about the diner or the skirt. It was about every man who had looked at her like she was prey, every moment she'd swallowed anger to keep the peace. The real damage wasn't in the kicks or punches. It was in the way they now realized they weren't in control anymore. And Jenna wasn't done. Shane came at her again this time, with a guttural yell, his fists swinging in sloppy arcs. He was bigger, heavier, but his moves were telegraphed a mile away. Jenna stepped inside his reach, her left arm shooting up to block, then twisted her hips and fired a lightning-quick roundhouse kick to his ribs. The crack of impact echoed off the brick wall, and Shane staggered back, clutching his side with a grimace. Troy tried to grab her from behind, but Jenna's instincts flared. She dropped her weight low, hooked her leg around his ankle, and swept him off balance. He crashed to the pavement with a sharp grunt, his palms scraping against the asphalt. Before he could roll away, Jenna pressed her knee to his chest. Not enough to injure, but enough to let him know he wasn't getting up without her say-so. Mick was the only one still on his feet, but barely. His hands were raised, though not in any real fighting stance, more like he was trying to figure out if charging her would end worse than walking away. The answer was obvious, but ego has a way of clouding better judgment. "You think you're tough," Mick barked, his voice cracking. Jenna tilted her head, her breathing controlled despite the bursts of movement. "I know I am." He lunged. She sidestepped with surgical precision, catching his wrist mid-swing and using his momentum to spin him into the wall. His forehead smacked the brick, and he bounced off it with a groan, stumbling toward the ground. Shane, still gasping from the rib shot, cursed and tried one last charge. That was his final mistake. Jenna pivoted hard on her left foot, her right leg whipping upward in a perfect high kick. The ball of her foot connected with his jaw, snapping his head back. His legs folded beneath him, and he hit the ground with a dull thud. The parking lot went silent, except for the sound of labored breathing, none of it coming from Jenna. From across the street, voices started shouting. A group of bystanders, who'd been smoking outside a late-night bar, had caught the whole thing. A few had their phones out, recording every second. The glow of their screens caught the street lamp light, making the scene look like something out of an action reel. "Holy crap, she just wrecked them," someone shouted. Jenna stepped back, her eyes scanning the three men now sprawled or kneeling on the ground. She kept her hands loose at her sides, her stance ready in case one of them was dumb enough to try again. But she could see it in their faces. There was no fight left, only fear and disbelief. For a long moment, no one moved. The sound of a car passing in the distance filled the gap, then faded. Jenna exhaled, the tension draining from her shoulders. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't winded. She was in control. Troy muttered something about not worth it and hauled himself upright, limping toward the truck. Mick followed, nursing the side of his head, avoiding eye contact. Shane stayed down a little longer, but eventually pushed himself up, his pride shattered along with his earlier smirk. As they climbed into the pickup, one of the bystanders called out, "Hey, Waitress, you ever think about going pro?" Jenna just smirked, walking past them without a word. The fight was over, but the night wasn't. She still had something left to say. Jenna stopped at the edge of the lot, the glow of the street lamp casting a warm halo around her. She turned back toward the truck, where Shane sat in the passenger seat holding his jaw. Her voice was calm, but it carried like a blade through the still night. Next time you think about putting your hands on someone, she said, remember tonight. Remember how it felt to be the one on the ground. Shane's eyes darted away. None of them spoke. The truck's engine roared to life, and they peeled out tires squealing against the asphalt. She watched the taillights vanish into the dark before finally letting out a long, steady breath. The bystanders across the street erupted into cheers and claps. A couple jogged over, still buzzing from what they'd witnessed. That was unreal, one man said, shaking his head. I thought they were gonna... He stopped himself, glancing awkwardly at her torn skirt. They thought wrong, Jenna replied, her tone light but resolute. Another woman stepped forward, phone in hand. I got the whole thing on video. If you want it taken down, just say the word. But honestly, people should see it. Guys like that don't stop unless someone makes them. Jenna hesitated. A few years ago, she might have asked her to delete, to keep her name out of trouble, avoid drawing attention. But something had shifted tonight. The humiliation she'd felt in the diner wasn't gone, but it had been replaced by something stronger. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was standing her ground. Post it, Jenna said finally. Maybe it'll make someone else think twice. The woman's grin widened. Oh, it will. As the crowd began to disperse, Jenna started back toward her car. Her body felt warm, the adrenaline still humming in her veins, but she was clear-headed. Every move she'd made tonight had been deliberate, controlled. She wasn't proud of the violence, but she was proud she'd acted on her own terms. Sliding into the driver's seat, she thought about Coach Ramirez again, about the long nights at the gym, and the discipline he'd drilled into her. He used to tell her, your fight isn't in the ring. Morales, it's in every moment you decide not to fold. Maybe she hadn't been in the cage for years, but the fighter in her had never left. She drove home with the windows down, the cool air brushing away the last of the night's tension. The diner would be buzzing with rumors tomorrow, some twisting the story, others embellishing it, but she didn't care. The people who mattered would know the truth. Jenna Morales wasn't someone you could humiliate without consequence. And as for the three who learned that lesson firsthand, well, she had a feeling they'd think twice before crossing paths with her again. Strength isn't just about knowing how to fight. It's about deciding when to. Jenna could have walked away and buried the memory under quiet shame, but she chose to stand her ground. Bullies thrive on silence, feeding off the fear and hesitation of their targets. The moment you refuse to play their game, you take back the power they tried to steal. Whether in a cage, a workplace, or a dimly lit parking lot, courage is built in the moments we defend our dignity. And sometimes, the most important fight is the one that reminds you who you really are.